Values is very important to me. I've always gravitated to working with and for companies that have values, and with and for people that have specific values. And to me, people leadership, at the end of the day, even tech companies, Caesar, I know you're a big tech company, it's led by people. And so, generative AI and everything else we're talking about now can only help us. But at the end of the day, we want the people on earth to thrive. And in order to do that, there will always be people connection and people leadership.
Maria, thank you so much for joining us on Live Long and Prosper. It's so wonderful to finally meet you.
It's great to meet you as well. I'm excited to be here.
I'd love for you to talk about a pivotal moment in your life that you feel like changed your career trajectory or, was a really difficult decision. And then would love to see how you thought about it from a professional perspective, personal perspective, financial perspective, and how you sort of baked all of these things together into making that career decision or life decision.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about two times because they're very different. And one is very early in my career, and one was a pivotal moment when I was already a senior leader. So starting with the beginning of my career, I had been in my first role for about 3.5 years. And I went to a company that was very purpose-driven, MetLife, really focused on financial freedom for people. And so I wanted to be in a company that was purpose-driven. And I was fortunate enough to get into a career development program. So I moved around a little bit over the 3 years in the beginning of my career in the employee benefits division. And I realized that I wanted to be closer to the customer. I was working with the customer regularly. I was in an account management type role. As a matter of fact, I was supervising the team by the end of that time frame. But I wanted to get into sales because I thought I would be closer to the customer there, part of the strategic engagement with the customer. And there were no women in sales. So, I certainly talked with my managers, and they really wanted me to stay where I was and continue to grow in the account management role. And so after many conversations with both our sales leaders and my manager, who was very supportive of me, I realized it was not going to happen there. And so I was fortunate enough to have a number of people who had left our division. I'm 25 years old, don't know the company all that well yet, but people had left that division and gone to other divisions. And one of my good friends was in marketing, and there was a job opening in the sales training organization. She let me know about it. I posted for it, and kind of the rest was history, going back to that teaching discussion we had. I loved training the sales force, but in the process, I had to learn all the soft skills. I had to learn all the subject matter expertise. I got connected with the most senior leaders of the company who used to come in and talk to the sales force. So it was a pivotal change for me. And frankly, the biggest decision was to say, I love my job, I love my boss, but I'm not going to be able to move in the direction I want to, and I need to take the initiative to find something else. So that's the first story.
That's actually super, super interesting. If you don't mind, can we dig into this before we get into the second story? Few interesting things. I think that was, first of all, where did you get your conviction about sales was where you wanted to be, and how do you develop that conviction? Because a lot of our listeners often get presented with something that looks like that could be interesting, but how do you sort of develop that, test it out, and then jump in?
Yeah, I was fortunate in that the sales leaders I worked with liked my work, and I had a lot of credibility with the client. This is B2B sales. They used to take me out on certain sales calls. They would take me to customer events, get me involved with customer issues. And this is way before we had video, et cetera. I mean, it was a lot of face-to-face and phone work. And so I got to learn through them and see how they interacted with the customer. And so I really it was on the job that I understood that type of engagement was something I wanted.
That's pretty interesting. So you basically were able to sort of check out the job before you could fully commit, before you had to fully commit to it.
Yeah, and I would say I asked to come to some of those meetings, which, historically the salespeople didn't bring out the administrative account managers. but I think I earned the credibility with the client who would ask for me. And then I, presented myself in a way that was supportive of the engagement. So I got the opportunity more often.
You made one comment which was quite interesting, and I wanted to just dig in a little bit into this. You said there were no women in the sales force at that time. And so, like, how is it like breaking new ground in many ways? And I know your career has been a lot of breaking glass ceilings, but this was pretty early in your career before you sort of had the confidence of being a star performer.
It was 1987. So it's not unusual in financial services that most of the sales leader were male. And I had great male colleagues. I had sponsors that were male. So that was never the issue. But I do think at that point, they were looking for a certain persona. And I don't think they were thinking woman versus male, but I wasn't that persona. I was coming out of the account management side. After I left, a number of people, male and female, came out of the account management side. But in those days, they were looking for a very specific type of background. And most of the salespeople didn't come in right out of school, and I was very young. So I do believe that was part of the decision making. But I think the other part was they needed me where I was. And what I had to learn was that just because the company wanted me in a certain role didn't mean that I was going to continue to be satisfied and really, enjoying what I was doing, and that I needed to be my own advocate. And that's probably the biggest thing I learned from a glass ceiling perspective, is that if you do feel like there's something above you that's keeping you where you are, whatever the reason, you have to be your own advocate to move forward.
Now, that's a great point. I think being your own advocate, and the other pieces, you kind of took your career into your own hands in a way and said, this is the path I want to do, and sort of charted it. And that's another great lesson for everyone.
It's interesting. We can talk about it later, but what that developed into over time was the idea of having a plan A, plan B, and plan C. And if you have more options in your mind, you are willing to take more risk on plan A because you have a plan B and a plan C.
Oh, I'd love for you to dig into that. What was your plan B and plan C, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah,
when
sure. I had looked outside. I actually had gotten a few other offers, but I didn't think that they were quite right. And so I knew that I was marketable outside. I knew what others were willing to pay me and what type of roles I could get at that time frame. So that was plan B. And plan C was I had talked with my manager and said, at the time I was supervising, and said, I really am ready for a bigger role. What could that look like? So I really had 3 options outlined.
And that's definitely a very interesting plan, to just a meta plan of having these things. As you said, it helps you take a much bigger role.
It's interesting. You look back all these years later, and I talk with such conviction. Cesar, that's not how I felt at the time. I was working a lot of hours. I was new to the corporate world. I can articulate it now as if it was this big grand plan, but in actuality, it was just the way my mind thought.
Yeah. But in a way, for people sort of at an earlier stage in their careers, like where you were then, just having a couple of different options.
Exactly.
Whether your works out or not is a good strategy. They don't have to have the conviction that you have now. But I want to explore a slightly different facet of this. Obviously, did this change your personal life much? Did it have an impact on your how you thought about what your personal life was? Did you travel more? Did you sales is probably a lot more. It's probably a different lifestyle in many ways. It's traveling, meeting, as you mentioned. Being on calls.
Yeah. So I moved into the sales training organization. And the way it changed my life was, number one, I met so many more people throughout the organization coming from all over the US, because this was the US division. I also met all the senior leaders, and I started to get tapped for enterprise work. So I got into much higher level work very early in my career that led to me being put on a special project for us to look at selling our medical business, which was a huge project for the company. So I traveled all over the country with one of the C-suite leaders, kind of as his right hand very early in my career, like mid-20s. And it did change my life. I learned a lot about how to think about business in a very elemental way, in terms of, we talk a lot about core businesses and adjacent businesses. We talk about capital usage, shareholder value, all the things that people talk about for public companies today. We were a mutual company and had not thought that way, even as a company. And here I was now at a point where we were strategically saying, how do we fundamentally grow this company? Where do we have our core capabilities? And how do we think about either divesting or growing this big business? And we ended up deciding to divest it. And then I ran the divestiture and bringing in other businesses when we partnered with another insurance company.
Wow, at mid-20s, that's such an incredible experience.
Yeah, it was incredible. So that went on until my early 30s, between all the work and then creating the new environment with bringing in the non-medical businesses from, at the time, Travelers, and then selling the medical business with Travelers to United Health Group. So I had a lot of amazing experience very early in my career.
There's another point you mentioned, which is, I just wanted a little bit of a sidetrack, but it was quite interesting. You said you managed to work with a senior C-suite person. And, earlier in the conversation, you said you've had a lot of sponsors. I know you've been an active sponsor for many people.
Yes.
How do you advise people build that kind of relationship? And how did you go about developing sponsors at that stage in your career?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is taking the time for the personal relationships, asking for advice, getting on somebody's calendar for coffee. Now with Zoom and with other, channels, it makes it so much easier to do a virtual coffee. But it does mean taking the time to ask and creating the personal relationship. I talk a lot about sponsorship, because to me, sponsorship is what you need, especially early in your career. And the person has to know you well enough, both personally and professionally, to put their reputation on the line, because usually sponsors are sponsoring you when you're not in the room. And so they need to be able to put their hand up and say, trust me, I know this person. I know their work. I know their intellectual curiosity. I know they can be connected well to this role. And that takes them knowing you personally. So take the time to have those coffees. Really ask for advice, and try to be in a position where you're put on either a cross-functional opportunity, an extracurricular opportunity where the person gets a chance to see you in action.
I can relate to that. And a lot of my life, I've benefited from having incredible sponsors, and a lot of it was actually also being able to do that extra work after you've done your regular day job. And it's been a fantastically great opportunity to have had those kind of mentors.
Absolutely. And I mean, you talk a lot about, we've talked about work and balance. And, I'm probably a strange person to say that, because these extracurricular activities were so rewarding to me, I didn't consider them work. If I was doing a little extra somewhere, or I got to travel with my boss and wasn't home for weeks on end, I had an amazing learning experience. And so that's a little bit of a difference between, like, I kind of blurred work and life a little bit. So I felt more balanced than probably people might today, where it's like a very bright line.
That is true too. But sometimes I feel like if you're doing something you really love, then it kind of blurs the line. Like I'm accused often of working very hard, but that's because, I don't know, I'm enjoying this. Like
Exactly.
I would probably do it if I didn't get paid. And
Exactly.
as a startup, you don't get paid, so you still enjoy it. Maria, I'd love to dig into your second pivotal moment that you mentioned earlier.
Sure. By the second pivotal moment, I was already pretty senior. I was at the level of like an executive vice president, kind of one below the president of the company. And we went through a major reorganization for a variety of reasons. A number of very senior people left the organization, and we had 3 people kind of at the top running this part of the company. And my president had wanted to make some changes. So he asked me for some help with the organizational model and the operating model. And I put a lot of time into helping him think through the big roles and what they could look like with our head of HR. And so there was a big role that was running sales and account management and all the customer facing work across the entire division. There was a big role running all product across the division. And I felt strongly that they were important roles, and as did he. And he was really excited to offer me the head of the product organization. And I had run almost every product in the division. And so I was actually really disappointed to be asked to run product. I wanted to be asked to run sales, account management, and all the customer facing work. And so when he asked me, I actually was so frustrated and upset that I actually teared up. And, as a woman and, and I think he was a little taken aback too, that it was, emotional. And what I said to him was, I stepped back from that and said, can I have 24 hours to think about it? I was coming in hopeful that you would offer me this other role. And if I can have 24 hours, I'd like to show you the pros and cons of the two people you want to put in these roles. And would it be better to have this other person head product and me head sales and account management? And he gave me the 24 hours. The first lesson there was it's okay to get emotional, but you need to then, take the time you need and come back. Secondly, I stepped away and took myself out of the equation and just looked at the backgrounds of the two people and put together a fact-based pros and cons list on putting either myself or the other person in the sales role. And went back in 24 hours later, presented it. He took a few days and ended up putting me in the sales role.
Oh, wow. That's super interesting. And that's actually a great example. You really took your career into your own hands and
Right.
reshaped the organization the way you wanted it to be.
Right. And the reason that I felt so strongly about it was having done all the product roles at the company I was at, you ran the P&L as a product leader. But there was not as much engagement and connection between the people that were customer facing and the customer centricity needs with what the products were delivering. So my thought was that putting the person who was always more market facing but had the P&L background into sales and account management, we could start bringing together, the customer journeys and, transform the way we were thinking about products. This is pretty early on. I don't think customer centricity was even, a big concept in those days.
On hindsight now, do you think that was the right call for you and the company?
Absolutely. As I think about moving through my career, I made a lot of lateral moves. But being able to be an end-to-end general manager, you have to have done a lot of different roles because you have to have seen the business and the customer from a lot of different vantage points.
In both these decisions, did the financial considerations ever play into the picture? Were you going to earn more, or was your compensation structure different? I would assume between sales and product, there was a difference in compensation structure. Did that play into your thinking?
I'd say that financial remuneration played in more from the perspective of, did I feel valued? I never was motivated just by money. And the good news was, as I continued to grow in my career, I was making enough money that it wasn't a basic need. So then it was really more around, do I like my role? Am I satisfied with what I'm doing? Am I adding real value? And am I getting paid for it?
I want to change tracks a little bit, Maria. I think you talked, you mentioned you've done a lot of lateral moves. You've done a lot of different roles, responsibilities as a general manager across. And, obviously in each of these roles, how you prioritize, how you make decisions, that has changed. Are there any sort of broad principles that you've held constant and dear to yourself throughout all these different roles?
Yeah, I'd say from a broad principle perspective, number one, I started leading people about 15 months into my career. So very early on, it was all about creating a symbiotic team and surrounding my team with people that were intellectually curious, that brought a real skill set to the table, that was willing to challenge me, because I can be strong. I mean, I'm outgoing, I have points of view, and I need people on the team around me that, can push back and can give me a different point of view, and that we as a team own the business together. And I think that's probably one of my biggest rewarding strengths, was being able to either participate in or facilitate and lead teams that when we were done, 1 + 1 was 15. I always kind of moved and gravitated toward tough assignments, either transformations, mergers and acquisitions, and establishing new businesses. My last role was this billion-dollar startup across 60 countries where we promised the street we'd do double-digit top and bottom line growth. And I was doing most of it through influence. And so the team and the ability to create a team that really sees what's possible and then move forward with them was so critical.
Yeah. I'd love to dig into that a little bit. Like when you're building a team, like, in some cases you have an opportunity to pick everyone on the team, but some cases you come in with a partly formed team. How have you sort of selected the right individuals and sort of fit them together into this team?
Yeah, I would say, Caesar, the first thing I always do is an exercise that's so basic, but it's like an assimilation exercise where we have a facilitated session. I put down my expectations, how I think about leading, how I'd like to have the team lead, and I do truly believe that the team owns the business outcomes as a team. We were senior enough in these roles as I moved around where you couldn't point to somebody above you or somebody aside you. We were owning this together. And so we put together this assimilation exercise where I would write down what my expectations were, how I thought about the business, how I thought about interacting with each of them and them as a team. They would actually do the same exercise about what they thought I would be doing. So it was about, how we led together. And then we'd have a discussion. And we talk about where we were aligned completely, where they had different points of view of either me or of how they'd like to lead at the table. And it really starts to set the table to say, if you want to be part of this leadership team and this change opportunity, here's what the expectations are collectively of each other. And from there, then I usually probably spent too much time giving people the opportunity to be part of it. If I went back and looked at places where I would have made some different choices, most of the time is I would have moved on people earlier. And so, because usually when you inherit a team, many of them are the right people. Others may be the right people for a different role or at a different time, but I really instinctually knew that earlier than I probably pulled the trigger. So that would be one lesson learned for other people, which is, trust your instincts. The person could be an excellent leader, but if they're not fitting for what you're trying to create, a symbiotic leadership team who's going to co-own the delivery of whatever you're doing, then move quickly.
So Maria, moving from you've had a pretty amazing career. But every career has some setbacks in it. Are there any setbacks that today you look back and you feel like that was an important learning opportunity for you, and sort of to whatever extent you're ready to share, what would you share from that?
Yeah, I think everybody has setbacks in their career. Some of it is a career stall. I certainly had times. I mentioned my first job where I probably was ready to do something different a year to a year and a half before I had the opportunity to. But I'm going to speak to one specifically pivotal time in my career. I had a health issue, a pretty major health issue at the time when I was about 40 years old, very major. And so I was going to take some time off to take care of that. And we had a major thing happen in the business. And so I came back to work to help out 6 days after major surgery, which was a setback for me because I really should have taken the full 6 weeks that I needed to take. And I was one of those people that never really took many days off other than vacation. But when I came back, I had a new leader at the head of the business. So the leader who had come in didn't have any background in our business at all. And while I think he respected me, he was very skeptical about the business and very skeptical about sales people. And so this is the time when I was now running these sales and account management and the whole customer facing side of this division. And the new leader came in and kind of said, I want to throw out all the rules. I'm going to put boxes on a page. Everybody has to apply for their job. no one is safe. We're going to start over. So we talked before about leadership of teams. And while I said I should have acted more quickly on a few people. In this case, it was none of you. I don't know that any of you are the right people. You now apply for your jobs. And that really unsettled me. That was not really the type of leadership that I was used to. And I was also just in recovery. I mean, I was only like a month out of a major health event. And so I actually had to step back and say, do I want to stay here? We had a couple of events where I saw behaviors I wasn't comfortable with. We had a huge sales event where the person got up on the stage and said to a whole division of my sales leaders, I'm not sure I like this business. You got 6 months to prove whether or not, we should stay in it. And so what I ended up doing, I did a lot of soul searching, and I could have just left. I had my resignation letter done. And I decided to go in and confront this person and just say, if you want to fire me, please fire me. But, I can't have you undermining my leadership with my team. And salespeople are very sensitive, and as they should be, because they hear no all the time. And so, we need to be motivating them and thanking them at recognition events. We can't be scaring them into believing that we may not even be in these businesses. And, he apologized. He said he was just trying to light a fire and didn't realize that the way he did it was inappropriate. We went on to have additional issues. And I just said, from a values perspective, I can't work with this person. So I handed in my resignation. And fast forward, the president of the company, we talked several times, and for a variety of reasons, not specifically related to me, this person left the organization, and I opted to stay.
It's amazing to see how, you've sort of shaped not just your career, but the organization around the principles and the beliefs you've had. Speaks to sort of the force of character and passion and will in many ways.
Values is very important to me. I've always gravitated to working with and for companies that have values, and with and for people that have specific values. And to me, people leadership, at the end of the day, even tech companies, Caesar, I know you're a big tech company, it's led by people. And so, generative AI and everything else we're talking about now can only help us. But at the end of the day, we want the people on earth to thrive. And in order to do that, there will always be people connection and people leadership.
No, we absolutely believe that at our time. I mean, we're a very small company, 100 people, but compared to most others. But, we feel like the biggest advantage we have is sort of the collective pool of people who've not just come to Arda because they are they believe in the company, but because they feel for the mission. And they have that passion to make the mission come true. And so I can completely hear it. And if you visit us, or when you visit us, I hope you visit us, you'll see that reflected across the team, where it's tech company, but especially in a tech company, people are so incredibly important.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And making financial services approachable, which is what you're doing. I mean, at the end of the day, to me, financial services are underpinnings of people being able to grow and develop personally. And, you've got to be able to protect the basics in life. And so having the ability to have financial mechanisms to do that in a way that's digestible for most people is, I think, the future.
That's absolutely. And it's also a big part of our mission. I mean, Sam, who worked for you for many years, but a number of us, when we got together, like the big goal for us was we've learned so much about these amazing things financial services can do. How do we bring that to millions more people around the world?
Exactly.
And, especially around insurance, the kind of business that Sam has built truly takes things that were only limited to like the, billionaires and the family offices. And now suddenly we're seeing 30-year-olds do it, which is, an incredible superpower. So it's been, we say we're trying to, unlock this financial superpowers of the ultra rich. And that's something that really, really motivates us.
That's great. And congratulations, because I think you're doing it in a way that's additive. So, you can build on the ecosystem that's been built from the insurance and financial services industry, and you're additive rather than kind of completely replacing. Because, to your point, I think, the understanding that financial systems are large and protected, but then making it approachable for people is incredible.
Absolutely. Maria, now that we're on the topic of finances, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your financial perspectives in life. Like, how have you thought about money? Where did you learn about money? What are the lessons you've learned about money in your life?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And I was very fortunate. My dad worked 3 jobs growing up. He was first generation U.S. His parents had come from Italy. And he went to school at night on the GI Bill. So he'd always learned that, hard work in the US could lead to good things. I think it was instilled in him and then instilled in us that, if you work hard and you're smart about how you work and you save your money, good things happen. So he'd always taught us to be a good value, to work hard and to pay ourselves first. And that concept, pay ourselves first, to me is still probably the underpinning of why we've gotten to financial success. Because even at 22, making, a little bit of money, I stayed at home with my parents for the first year and a half to get an underpinning. So I had the finances to move out. I had a credit card, but I paid it off every month. I had a car payment that I doubled up on so that I could get out of the car payment as quickly as possible. All of those things were instilled in me very early, which was minimize debt. And some people today might say that's not a great idea because, you might be able to make money on the debt. And so I do understand that you have to think about that. If you've got a student loan at 2 or 3% and you can make 5.5% right now in a high yield savings account, you leverage that, but that's not really debt because you've got the money to pay the debt. It's just how you're thinking about your financial instruments. But I was taught very early, work hard, save your money, have minimal debt. So everything that we did in life, I mentioned chapters before. I had a certain time frame. I wanted to own a home and we were saving to do that. We bought that home. That was a chapter. And then we continued each chapter thinking about how much money do we need? How much money can we spend? How much money should we be saving? Where should we be saving it? How do we protect it? And then how do we move to the next level? And so each step of the way, we had a financial plan, sometimes very simple. As we got more financial means, they became much more complicated, but they were all based on these chapters and what we wanted to do. And I'll give one example, which may seem a little strange to young listeners, but by the time I was 30, my dad had said to me, you have to think about your career as chapters. And after 50, nothing good happens unless you plan it. You can become, kind of obsolete in some ways. You're maybe more expensive than someone else. So you constantly have to be thinking about how you up your game and how you plan for your future. So we had the opportunity to defer compensation in certain roles. I deferred compensation with the idea I would retire at 50, 55, and 62. Now, do I ever think I'm retiring? I'm 62 now. I'm not retiring. But having said that, that mindset was really helpful because I was deferring compensation that I didn't need at the time. I was thinking about how would I live, with a pension scheme or other things coming in. And so it really forced me to think about the fact that I might not be bringing in the salary level that I was bringing in at the height of my career, and how would I think about that going forward. That gave me so many more options. I really wanted to do different types of work. I retired from MetLife after 34 years at 55 years old and could completely recreate myself, not worrying about the finances.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's two very different lessons, but both related. Paying yourself and, in a way, almost like paying yourself in the future. Right?
Yes.
Both, and that's a great way to think about financial freedom in general and life.
Yeah, and I'd say everybody's at a different place in their lives, but I do believe I was at the same company, but I had 22 or 23 jobs in 34 years. So I moved around a lot of laterals. So it wasn't always about a pay increase. I know a lot of our listeners are probably staying in roles maybe 2, 3 years and moving and having a nest egg to do that, where again, you can take risks because you're not worried about paying your bills.
As you moved through your career, did you seek out financial advice or work with a private bank or investment advisor?
Yeah, we started with an investment advisor probably mid-career, and my husband had been in the paper manufacturing business. Second career, he went back. He had already had his MBA in economics. Went back, got his accounting designation, became a CPA and a certified financial planner. So my husband's actually a CFP, and so that's been very helpful. But we started with someone through work, actually, kind of mid-career, and then got our own financial advisor and worked with them for many years.
Are there any things you wish, there's all this stuff you did right. Are there any things you wish you had learned earlier about money or about investing or financial services in general? What would you have done if you knew that earlier?
Yeah, I think I was pretty conservative earlier in my lifetime. I didn't. I was preserving principle too much. So I probably could have used a financial planning background in my 20s. In my 401k, I was more conservative than I should have been that young. I got less conservative as I got older, which actually doesn't make a lot of sense. But I would say, I think to your point earlier about some of the digital tools that are available to young people today, you can have $10,000 and really think like a financial planner, because what you do with that $10,000 is really important depending on what else you have.
Yeah. Actually, one of the interesting things is I see a lot of, our users typically range from 30 to 45. We call them members. And so particularly, I'm actually quite amazed seeing some of the even younger members and how sophisticated their thinking is. A number
Yes.
of them ask for, how much of allocation should they put into alternative assets? Which is, I think
Yes,
back to my career, I
absolutely.
never thought about it. I mean, yes, I'd heard of the big asset managers, but I would have never thought of alternative assets. But now, both there is awareness, but also there is there are alternative asset funds and
Instruments.
instruments available for $10,000 on ARDA. So suddenly
Yes.
it becomes a
Yeah.
lot more accessible, right? But it wouldn't have been, it wouldn't, in a way, it would have been ineffective if people didn't know about it and didn't ask for it. So I think it's happened both directions.
I would say three things about that. I'd say number one, we had equities and some kind of fixed income approach in our 401ks early on. Those were the retail opportunities. Today, I think three things have changed. Number one, social media, the internet. There's just so much more information available. My only caution on that is it's not all right. So, I can't tell you how many people ask me or my husband about Roth IRAs when they're 20 something years old. It's a really good instrument, but it's not right for everybody. And so, really getting underneath, curating the data, and then talking to someone or a couple people you trust to kind of validate that you're going in the right directions. A fantastic idea. I think the second thing is so many more instruments have retail opportunities now. The instruments are available, whether historically real estate wasn't as available to the individual. Right now, it's a tough time in the real estate environment, but that's been a nice asset class for many years. A lot of the alternatives, private credit, things that weren't available on the retail chassis now are. And my only advice to people on that is understand what you're getting into. And that takes a little bit more work, but it's all available online and through advisors as you can do so. And I think the third thing is you don't need a lot of money to get engaged now. And that's a big change. Even in terms of getting a financial advice, a lot of you asked about private bankers or, the big investment shops, you needed millions of dollars to get engaged in those kind of platforms. And today there's platforms available where you can get in at $10,000.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big goal of what we have. Like ARDA, we have no minimums. We don't charge anyone for joining. It's only when you decide to actually invest money into something. And a big part of that was that there's no reason why, there should be such high minimums. People should be able to start. And even when people have money, often you don't want to ask them to put a bunch of their money in at the same time because they build trust. So it's good for them to start with a smaller amount. And then as they build trust and understanding with the platform, expand into that. No, thank you so much for sharing. I want to ask one last question. If there was one piece of advice you wanted to give yourself when you were, in your early 30s, what advice would that be?
Trust your gut.
Trust your God.
I spent a lot of time trying to understand whether or not I was making the right move. And as I look back, my instincts were pretty good. And I just wish I didn't agonize as much over it at the time. Sometimes doing something, taking action is better than, kind of overanalyzing it.
Maria, I want to end with 3 fill in the blank questions. So very short, sort of lightning round. And, you don't have to spend too much time thinking about it, but just whatever comes to the top of your head. So I'm going to say the sentence and then dash, dash, dash. You please complete it. So if you want to prosper, never underestimate the power of
People.
That's beautiful. The 3 key ingredients of a long, fulfilling life are 1, 2, 3.
Family, friends, and I think intellectual stimulation for me.
And the simple joy that adds years to my life is?
My family and my friends.
That's beautiful. Maria, thank you so much for sharing so generously with us, and so grateful to you for joining us on Live Long and Prosper.